Alright guys, so it goes without saying that the West and China are decoupling. It was bad enough during Biden's term, but Trump, he's gonna take it to the next level. A few days ago, he announced to the world that China, Mexico, and Canada will be clobbered, an additional 10% on Chinese imports and a 25% tax on the rest.
Under the Trump Reciprocal Trade Act, other countries will have two choices. They will get rid of their tariffs on us, or they will pay us hundreds of billions of dollars, and the United States will make an absolute fortune. There will be no more unilateral economic surrender like we've done for many, many decades.
The strategy here is simple: impose big shocking tariffs to get other countries to remove theirs, or force manufacturers to build factories to produce stuff in the US. But this begs the question, will this work? Now, for certain countries, this would most definitely drive a response. Mexico, for example, has no choice but to comply. The US accounts for 83% of total Mexican exports. The dependency on the US consumer is extreme here, and that's why the Mexican president did a U-turn and complied. Mexico is the manufacturing center of the US. Companies like Ford, they have factories there making cheap cars in Mexican cities. Because of that, there's simply no escape for them. The majority of US imports come from the manufacturing industry. Mexico exported over $420 billion in that sector alone. It dwarfs every other industry in the country. A 25% tariff would decimate their economy and force companies to relocate back to the US. But if Trump thinks this is going to work against China, he better think twice. Unlike Mexico, China can survive independently from the US. You have Asia, Africa, and Latin America all trading with Beijing. And let's not forget China's big domestic population. A tariff threat would fall flat on its face. Firstly, the US depends a lot on Chinese exports to keep inflation down. Exports from China to the US are projected to hit over $500 billion, and that's the third highest amount since 2021. Trump going ahead with his 60% tariff on China while hammering away at other countries will spark an inflation crisis back home. How will he replace half a trillion dollars of cheap exports? We have multiple studies confirming that there will be pain. This is not a free pass. More likely, China is going to retaliate against the US. While it's true that US exports to Beijing are falling, one sector is in panic mode. And we're of course talking about US farmers. The entire farming industry is about to get hit badly. China has been reducing their reliance on US farm imports. Food is vital for China. They don't produce enough, but they also don't want to be at the mercy of US sanctions. In 2022, China imported 19% of their food from US farms. Last year, it was only 16.6%, and because of this, US farm exports collapsed to a 3-year low. In response to Trump's tariffs, China can slash exports even more, and that's going to put pressure on US farmers whose cost of production is already sky high. China is the largest market for US farm goods, and they are the biggest importer of soybeans. Consider how bad the numbers are when it comes to operating a farm. Revenue from both crops and livestock is down by 5%. At the same time, production expenses have gone up by 6%. Federal support, all the subsidies, have also collapsed by 33%. As a result, farm income is down by almost a quarter. And if you're a farmer, this is horrible news. Production costs will only increase. Farm equipment will have to be made in the US and not Mexico. China knows this. US farmers, they also know this. And the biggest way to decimate an industry is to make it so unprofitable that producers simply give up. It's a big risk the US is taking by escalating the trade war with China. The Chinese economy is already giving two big warning signs that the US can't overlook. China is snapping up cheap Brazilian soybeans, and the volumes they are buying are simply incredible. China has secured half of their total demand until April from Brazil. 20% of May to June demand next year has also been covered. By buying more soybeans from Brazil, Beijing is making sure a sudden ban from the US won't cripple their food supply. Besides, Brazilian soy is cheaper than the US by over $2 a ton, so Chinese importers save more money by buying it from their BRICS ally. Another warning sign is China aggressively buying more from the US itself, leading all the way up to the elections. And this might sound weird, but Beijing is stockpiling a ton of food for their national reserves. Since August, Chinese demand has been spiking hard. It has gone from nearly zero in July to record highs in November. US soybeans, they have low moisture and the Chinese love it. It's the perfect quality to stockpile for future use. However, in a trade war, we could see these imports dramatically drop to zero again. And this could throw US farmers into a big crisis. If you're a farmer, you have a dilemma here. Do you plant more crops this season to cater to Chinese demand? Because if you don't, revenues will drop and you can't make payroll. But if you do plant more and China decides to decouple, you could lose millions of dollars. Either the food will be sold on the cheap or they will go bad over time. So this is a serious issue for US farmers. They need a predictable supply and demand model. They have enough trouble fighting the weather alone and now they have to fight Trump's trade policy. And farmers can't get this wrong. If China decides to pull the rug and cancel their agreement, US soybeans exports to China would collapse. We could see up to 16 million tons of demand evaporate, and that will be a decline of over 50% for the next few years. This would utterly destroy many farms, big or small, especially those who have taken on a lot of debt. This is what happens when globalization falls apart. And speaking of that, we have to talk about EU's plan to clobber China. Now it's bizarre, but the EU is trying to flex their economic might, whatever's left of it. Europe is proposing hitting Chinese firms that help Russia. Now this is risky. The EU has already slapped Chinese EV companies with a brutal tariff, and now they want to punish China again. If we look at the EU's list of dual-use goods, we can see it's very broad and extensive. It's like a catch-all net to target any trade with Russia. We have semiconductors, machinery, rare earths, and even industrial parts. It's incredibly broad. So if the G7 wants to nail China or something, dual-use goods might just be it. But beware of the consequences. We have to realize how connected Europe's economies are with China. It's not just cars, a ton of imports from China is necessary for EU industries. And this is a point we need to hammer in. A decoupling between Beijing and Brussels would be devastating, more painful for the EU than China. The German government wants to build up their chip industry and they are planning to throw a 2 billion euro in new subsidies. Remember how dire the situation is. Intel has halted plans to build a $30 billion plant in Germany. And it shouldn't be a surprise. You can't manufacture competitive chips when the cost of production is just so high. Now, nothing can be done about the energy situation. Europe can't go back to cheap Russian gas. It's politically impossible. So if China decides to retaliate, they could very easily derail their chip ambitions. It will be impossible to make affordable chips in Germany. To make semiconductors, you need rare earth elements like dysprosium. It's a critical element in making advanced chips. And Chinese refineries produce 99% of globally refined dysprosium. So once again, the success of Germany's chip ambitions will rely on good relations with China, at least ensuring things don't get progressively worse. But let's shift gears to Russia's own hit on the US energy system, and this is very significant. Over the past year, we have heard the US imposing a ban on Russian uranium imports. However, volumes are still reaching the US through a waiver, and to counter this, Putin has closed the loophole. Russia has banned the exports of enriched uranium to the US, and this is important because Trump wants to bring manufacturing back home. To do this sustainably, you have to go beyond just threatening tariffs. You also have to go beyond subsidies. You need to ensure a steady supply of cheap energy. So Russia has thrown a spanner into the US energy system. And it's important we quantify how much power is generated from nuclear energy in the US. The amount is very significant. 20% of power is generated from nuclear power plants, and that's 5 times more than solar power, double that of wind. It's even more than oil and coal put together. Just like China, Russia controls the majority of nuclear enrichment facilities. So Putin cutting away supply to the US is a significant blow. You can't suddenly construct an enrichment plant within months. This squeezes US energy output. Nuclear power is very reliable, and it can provide maximum power over 90% of the time, exactly what US industries need to be competitive. Russia's uranium supply accounted for 27% of US demand last year. Its more supply versus the entire EU is on par with US domestic production as well. So this ban is horrendous. It's a hit on US nuclear energy because now there will be a big scramble to replace the supply from Russia. The US will need to get more uranium across the Atlantic. They will be buying from a Europe that's already suffering from an energy crisis. More demand chasing a limited supply means higher prices. Without US waivers for Russian uranium, the spot price could increase by 20%, but an immediate ban could skyrocket the price. If the US didn't stockpile enough, prices could go up by even 30 or 40%. Even Trump himself admits the need for cheap energy. There's no way forward without affordable power. It's impossible to compete with China unless prices come down. The cost of power in China is still 10 to 20% cheaper than in the US, and that alone is enough to make a difference, especially when it comes to global exports.
If America is going to dominate the world in manufacturing once again, as it did when I was running things, you remember when they used to say you can't have manufacturing jobs in our country anymore? I said, really, why? But we must be the most affordable energy and electricity place anywhere on the planet. We have to have affordable energy. Right now, we have energy that's weak, substandard, and unaffordable.
So Trump is facing an uphill battle. He wants to bring industries back, but how can he do it without affordable energy? Can the US throw more subsidies at companies to relocate? Now that's possible, but it will just jack up the national debt even more. So Biden's economic war with Russia is making a big mess of things. It also sandwiches Trump into a difficult position. If he removes sanctions on Russia, the neocons will call him weak. But if he doesn't, US industries will get squeezed and lose out to China. So hang tight, guys. The economic chaos is only going to get worse. The trade war escalation is just beginning. But let me know what you think. Will China retaliate on US farmers? How will the US replace their supply of Russian uranium? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.